Colbert is passionate about giving access to transformative teaching and learning methods to students and teachers who otherwise would not be exposed to these innovative strategies. Please help me welcome to the stage Vicky Colbert as she shares her passion about education and access. Vicky.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here with all of you fellows, and thank you so much for the Milton Foundation for the invitation to share my life project. And I don't get rid anymore of more than 30 years dedicated to this life project. I'm probably the most visible person, but behind me there are wonderful thousands of teachers, students, communities, parents that have participated in this. Initially, it started as a local innovation in Colombia. Gradually became a national policy. We reached almost 20,000 schools. And once the World Bank selected it as one of the 3 innovations that had successfully impacted national policy, we got a lot of countries coming into Colombia. So we started expanding this internationally. Most recently, we have worked in Vietnam and in Zambia, and impacting more than 5 million children, not directly us, but through the governments. So there are many lessons learned after this experience of so many years. So thank you once again for letting me share with you this collective, this life project of so many years. First of all, I've been pushing this from all my professional spheres. First as co-author of the model, the first director of Escuela Nueva, which means, by the way, new school in Spanish, from the Ministry of Education in Colombia, then as Vice Minister of Education in Colombia, where I gave it total support, reaching 20,000 schools, then as UNICEF Regional Education Advisor for the Latin American and the Caribbean region, so we started moving internationally, and then finally, but not least, I had to create an NGO. And right now I'm heading Fundación Escuela Nueva, which is an NGO, to maintain the quality of the model and to continue innovating. Colombia was the first democracy in Latin America, but at the same time it has had an enduring conflict of illegal armed groups and with the army. So we've had conflict for many, many, many years. Despite that, at this moment, Colombia has had in the last decade a big move towards change, and we have a lot of hope and expectations. It grew in tourism 40% in the last 7 years. So there's a lot of hope that we can finalize the conflict in some way. Originally, I'm a sociologist. I studied sociology of education because I'm totally convinced that unless we have quality basic education, we cannot have development, nor social, nor economic, nor political, and we cannot have democracy, nor peace. So totally convinced that without this, I dedicated myself to improve the quality and the access of basic education. That's where we started. One of the crucial things that I wanted to say is that before we started working, I had the chance to study and have quality education myself. And before I started working, one of the first things I did was try to build on what already existed in the country. And there were partial response to offering complete primary education, which was the main issue in Colombia at that moment, like the rest of Latin America. 30 years ago, countries did not offer complete primary education, despite this was a constitutional mandate in each country. So I started visiting the schools. And what did I see? The problems we had. High repetition rates, high dropouts, very, very traditional methods, teacher-based learning, despite that we knew the theory for so many, many years. No relationship between what children learn and their families and their communities, school-family-community relationship. No learning materials 30 years ago. All of the money, I remember, 1% of the budget of the Ministry of Education went for children. The rest was just for salaries. And these are the ministries of education in most developing countries. Very traditional training, very expensive training and no follow-up. Using conferences, for example, and active participatory learning. our faculties of education, our teachers' colleges. Teachers that were not motivated. What they really wanted to do is something different. So, you know, all these things just showed that education systems in the region were like failed companies. Nothing worked. So the first thing we tried to do, and when I say we, is because I started working with rural teachers themselves. Now this was the most important part. They participated in the design of all this process because they were the ones that knew what they were going through, not the bureaucracy in the ministry. I started working through the ministry. So we started tackling all these problems that I mentioned, among others, in a systemic way. So the first thing is we have to think systemically if we want to improve quality basic education. We have to think systemically. We couldn't tackle each of these problems in isolation. We had to tackle them all together at the same time. The second issue I wanted to highlight is that when we started thinking of how to really reach the poorest of the poor, because by the way, there were many multi-grade schools. I don't know if you know this word. And I forgot my basic question. I'll get to that immediately. I got excited with sharing my story. Multi-grade schools are those schools, that's where we started. Like the little red house in the prairie, the little schoolhouse, how do you say that in English? Yeah, the little red schoolhouse in the prairie. Because these schools are invisible to most educational planners. And they exist in developed countries. They just exist where there's low density of population, where one teacher has to handle simultaneously first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. So when you have these challenges, you're forced to innovate. So this was a wonderful opportunity for innovation. Before I go on, I get carried on and get excited, I want to ask you the first question. And the first question is, if you're looking for a role model for improving the education system of your country, where would you look? Finland? US? China? Or Colombia? And don't worry if you don't choose Colombia. So, this is the first question. It's coming out. Here we go. Finland, of course. USA, China, and Colombia. No problem. But some of the important things that I want to share with you is the richness of South-South collaboration. And in many of the developing countries, there are wonderful innovations that are taking place. That can also be shared with the developed world. Because we have so many difficulties that it forces us to challenge every opportunity and introduce something new. So this is the positive aspect of having so many difficulties and so many problems. So I'll continue mentioning the problems, and as I mentioned, the education system was like a failed company. But we were thinking, how do we think systemically? If we want to have a child that is an active citizen, that is more active, that has more empathy, that has results, we also have to change the way of working with the teachers. Teachers themselves were never exposed to active learning themselves in their training, in their initial education. In our faculties of education in Colombia, nobody knows the word multigrade, which are 60% of the rural schools in Colombia. Because we're very theoretical. In Latin America, we produce poetry, a lot of poetry, but we still need to produce more science. And this is an issue. So this forced us to think of a new learning paradigm. More of the same is not enough. Just expanding current educational systems as they are is not enough. So I started building from what existed, and I met some wonderful teachers that were innovating, trying to help other teachers how to handle simultaneously several grades, different learning rhythms in the classroom. And UNESCO had an important project in Colombia. So I met this wonderful teacher, Oscar was his name, and I started bringing them to work with me. He was trying to introduce personalized education, individualized education, So this was sort of new at that time, which is not new anymore. But as a sociologist, I said, the first thing we have to think is it's not how we can have 10 wonderful schools. We have 34,000 rural schools in the country. So any innovation has to be viable technically speaking. It means that any teacher can do it anywhere in the country without having a PhD. And this is not the reality of our countries in the developing world. It had to be technically feasible. Politically feasible, we have unions, and if teachers are against it, it's not going to work. I myself was, as a vice minister, I had to handle all these issues. And the third issue is financial feasibility. It has to be cost effective. If you have a wonderful innovation that can only be expanded to 10 schools, then your local innovation cannot have impact. So that was the first thing from the outset. And Oscar was doing wonderful things. But the first thing I said is, what he's doing in his own school, how could we do it in 34,000 schools? So this was the challenge. We transformed necessity into a positive pedagogy. And this is why I think we also have to look in developing countries what they have. And we also had to think of how to transform all these variables, because it's so easy to handle one variable. But education systems have so many variables. So how can we translate all this complexity into very simple, manageable action so that anybody can do it? I think this was the richness of the process that we were developing. I started bringing rural teachers to the ministry. I was starting to initiate the process within the ministry, and I found so much resistance. How can you make a change of a learning paradigm through a bureaucracy of a Ministry of Education? But this was good for us because it forced us to start bottom up. The first thing I had to do to convince the bureaucrats was, it works. So we started bottom up, having demonstration sites, and always research and evidence behind, empirical evidence behind. It was, for us, this was the greatest tool. Demonstrate empirical findings to influence policy level decision making. So this was crucial for us. But I had to protect the innovation so much. We really had to hide from the bureaucracy so that things would continue. So I think this journey, the first 10 years, making this local innovation a national policy, was crucial for us to help design an innovation that could go beyond the ministry. Okay, so we say Escuela Nueva, quality education for peace and democracy. Because all the things I've been sharing, I want to show you some images. And none of these ideas are new. I myself was exposed to good quality learning in my basic education. The ideas came to Colombia 100 years ago. Montessori, De Crowley, Dewey, all these ideas are not new. But the new thing is to put it in practice in low-income schools, not in elite schools. Most of these ideas ended up in the elite schools. So, Escuela Nueva, new school, which means in Spanish, quality education for peace and democracy, because I want to make the linkage between pedagogy and citizenship building. That is crucial. And more of the same is not enough if you want to produce better citizens. So, I want to start my second one. By the way, here I go for my second question. I forget my second question. Before I start with, well, you can read this. Read this, and then I'll go to the question. But it has been only in the last 30 years that efforts have been made to find a solution to this problem. And what has resulted? Schools continue exactly the same as before. Who said it? Oops. There we go. Comenius in the year 1600. I guess this leaves a message, an important message, that everything has changed except the way of learning. I like to compare education with the health sector. If you bring a doctor from 100 years ago into a hospital today, that doctor is lost. Everything has changed in medicine and health. If you bring a teacher from 100 years ago into a classroom today, even in a developed country, that teacher is not so lost because everything has changed except the way of learning. Information is changing so fast, but the way we learn has not changed the same within the formal schools, despite that we know the theory 100 years ago. So I wanted just to leave this as an inspiration, because this is precisely what we tried to do. Challenge the conventional teacher-centered mode of education that everybody's familiarized with, and that is exactly the same from 100 years ago. So let me pose the second question. The second question is, what is the most important function of a school today? Basic life skills? Academic achievement? Citizenship and participation? So let me hear from you. Basic life skills, academic achievement, or citizenship and participation? So, citizenship and participation, well, this is good for Milton Foundation, academic achievement, and teach basic life skills. Well, this is wonderful, except, in a way, they're so important because I still feel, in Latin America, 50% of children in 4th grade do not understand what they read. So these are issues. These are issues. If you cannot comprehend the other person you're talking to, you cannot build really citizenship issues. So all these are important. Okay, so let me show you I just want to share with you some images of Escuela Nueva, how we had to challenge the conventional mode of education and really get into the principles we knew from so many years ago. So Escuela Nueva transforms the conventional school, teacher-centered and way of learning, from frontal, teacher-centered instruction into child-centered, active, participatory, cooperative learning. This is not new. But the new thing is how to put it in action in a very simple way so that any teacher can do it in the middle of the jungle of Colombia or in the richest school in Bogota. So what does it promote? Oops. Student-driven learning approach focused on the child. Children are learning all the time through dialogue and interaction. The new modern theories, it puts in practice modern theories of education in a very simple, practical way and cost-effective way. Cooperative learning, where children learn from each other, peer tutoring, express themselves creatively. They're constructing knowledge together. This is pure social constructivism. And these things we're supposed to do from 100 years ago. But as I mentioned, they come only to the elite schools. This is a classroom in Escuela Nueva. Not everybody's doing exactly the same thing at the same time. Some are working individually, some are working in pairs, some are working in groups. Flexibility, flexible calendars, so that children can finish academic units at their own pace. So we had to deliver education a different way. Relevance, if things are not meaningful for students, how can they be motivated to continue learning? I mean, these are simple things. We talked about this 30 years ago. A new role of the teacher as a facilitator, not a transmitter of facts or instruction. And this is what everybody's talking about now. A new role of the teacher, somebody that spends more time with their students, understanding the students, having empathy skills, giving them feedback during the process, not at the end when it's too late, making the intelligent questions to take them to higher level thinking skills. So it's a new role of the teacher. The teacher cannot continue spending their time transmitting instruction. But for that, we had to compensate for what teachers' colleges were not doing and faculties of education. This is in Uganda, by the way. We needed experiential processes, that they go through the same methodology that they're going to use with their children. This is where the problem is. In Latin America, we continue giving conferences on active participatory learning. Micro centers, let's get the teachers together. They learn from each other. It's the creation of a network, of a learning community. And this was 30 years ago when we didn't have new technologies. And this was amazing because this was more important than getting them together than a supervisor going just simply to have a vertical type of control. By the way, Michael Fullen, this is one of the strongest issues right now in having impact on learning achievement, a collectivity of teachers, how they share their solutions, bringing parents into the learning process in an intelligent way. And what Dewey said 90 years ago or 80 years ago, democracy starts in the classroom. So precisely was how, school governments, committees of children, taking initiatives, leadership skills. If you don't have an approach that's participatory learning, how can you have citizenship afterwards? So Escuela Nueva has happy, healthy, capable, confident youth, and we've always had monitoring behind testing self-esteem of children. We also had to change our textbooks. We had to introduce dialoguing textbooks, a concept so that children could construct knowledge together. So it was a set of dialoguing, reusable because we had to think of costs, something that could remain in the school for many, many years, and that could be adapted locally and culturally. So the methodology of the learning guides promotes individual work in pairs, collaborative group, always dialoguing and having interaction among themselves. So Escuela Nueva enables youth to learn, fostering the development of cognitive and social-emotional competencies for peace and democracy. So there have been many, this sounds very nice and very pretty, but the important thing is that it's proven. There are empirical evidence behind all the things I'm saying, because that's the only thing that is left from me from being a sociologist. At least we ensure to always have monitoring and evaluation. I want to go to this I saw this in the newspaper of Colombia many years back. Wanted individuals who can work in teams. Do you have the ability to solve problems, follow instructions, lead processes, meet deadlines, but especially work in teams and in group? If the answer is yes, you have a greater chance of getting a job, but educational systems are not producing this, at least in the LAC region. Okay. And these are what now everybody's calling them 21st century skills. So in a way, Escuela Nueva was like the story of Cinderella. We had so many constraints, so many problems, that we were forced to really get into innovation and into social skills and 21st century skills, which is what a computer cannot do. Learning to learn. Learning to lead processes, learning how to synthesize information, learning to work in teams. We can't have geniuses that kill the other person in front of them. Critical thinking, taking complex problems, follow instructions, criticize and accept criticism and not use force. Test knowledge, of course now with ICT, with new technologies. Take risks. These are leadership skills. So the story of Escuela Nueva is what we started looking for complete primary education in the country 30 years ago. We ended up with cutting-edge pedagogics and 21st century skills. Yeah, ways of thinking, learning to learn, learning to know, creativity and innovation, decision-making, problem-solving. Johnson & Johnson so many years ago in the United States demonstrated that cooperative learning helps children to reduce prejudice, to reduce stereotypes, to solve problems collectively, to take decisions. So we've known this for ages. So this is what we put in practice. But for doing that, we had to change many things to help teachers make the challenge of changing the conventional model of education and getting into good pedagogy. So this is the essence of Escuela Nueva. Nothing new, personalized education. Not everybody learns the same thing at the same time. Cooperative learning, you go from transmission of knowledge to social construction of knowledge. This is the essence. I'm working with François Tadei in France. He's the head of the Interdisciplinary Research Center in Paris. He's trying to change French education, poor man. He's a great scientist. But we're working together because he's trying to introduce exactly the same thing at the university level. This is our webpage. Just in case you want to look in more in detail, we have a lot of information. But now I want to share with you, this was very pretty. This was well done. But then what happened? the country in 1991 became totally decentralized. So now, we had results. UNESCO had demonstrated that Colombia was the only country in Latin America after Cuba where rural schools outperform urban schools, except of megacities. There has been so much evaluations behind Escuela Nueva from the World Bank, from USAID, from, name it, Stanford University also, where I did my graduate work, from many, many institutions. We know it works. It's a proven solution. We went to scale. We had results. The University of London published in 2006 the impact of Escuela Nueva on peaceful democratic behavior. And coming out of Colombia, especially important. So we have the evidence. It's a proven solution to improve quality education and citizenship. We went to scale. We have results. 40 countries came into Colombia. And the last 2 countries we've been working are in Zambia and in Vietnam, precisely. The Chinese are inviting me. They're very interested also. Anyway, the issue here is that everything was put in place. The country became decentralized. And then everything fell apart. Now, the ministries of education, not only in Colombia but in Latin America, had to spend most of their time reorganizing themselves. Their new role. And they forgot about pedagogy. So most reforms in Latin America are administrative in nature, learning simply how to handle decentralization, which is important at the end. But everybody forgot the pedagogy. Everybody forgot what a teacher can really do in a classroom. So we really took the school as the unit of change. And I was leaving the Ministry of Education after we reached 20,000 schools. We had results. The horse won the race. But things are not sustained in governments. So I had to create an NGO. I said, this is too important to let go of this. This is too important. So with a team that we've been working together for so many years, we had to create Fundación Escuela Nueva, an NGO, to continue innovating, to be a learning organization, to continue adapting it to new contexts and populations. So we adapted it to urban schools. We had results. We adapted it to migrant population. We had results. We're working now with adults, non-formal contexts. We have results. So it works, but we had to create the NGO to sustain and continue innovating. So here I go with my third question. The third question is, if you want to create sustainable improvements in education, what will you do? Lobby the Ministry of Education? Create an NGO, like I had to do, because I still have to tell you some of the problems we had? Build a movement, a coalition of partners? What would you do? May we see the results? Build a movement. Well, this is the direction we're going. Precisely, we want to have a coalition of partners, and here's where you can help us out. We have, let's say I want to share the 5 takeaways, but at the same time share with you and the areas where we need a lot of your support and action. So the 5 takeaways after my brief presentation is, yes, we can improve quality of education in developing countries. And we started saying this before Obama's campaign. Second, we had to think systemically. Third, more of the same is not enough. You need a paradigm shift, because we know the theory from 100 years ago. But the most important one that deals with citizenship is we have to go beyond cognitive achievement. Social skills, the soft skills that everybody's talking about, are crucial. And we need help monitoring those instruments, having instruments to monitor the social skills. We're working on that. This is something, it would be great to work together. We need a lot of help to have social media supporting us. Twitter, Facebook, all these things. We need more support from students. I have a lot of interns that come from Germany, have come to help us out. Right now I have somebody from Australia, Indian origin. We need to write conceptual documents. We need the support of social media to help us move this forward as a movement. Hopefully we hope to exist in the US where there's a culture of philanthropy next year, but we need a coalition of partners. We have something that works, that is proven, that has evidence behind, and that's still one of the most longest running bottom-up innovations that's still surviving. Because I had to create the NGO precisely because innovations are very vulnerable to political and administrative changes. So the only way to move forward is bringing all these coalition of partners together. And I really hope that I can have a lot of your collaboration from these youth full of energy and experiences and skills that many of us sometimes lack. Thank you so very much.